am so excited about my guests today. They are the authors of The New Power Couple, and their newest book, just about to hit the shelves, The Argument Hangover, provides a no BS approach to fighting smarter and reconnecting faster after disagreements, and learning to communicate your needs and feelings in a way that works for you and your partner. Please help me welcome Jocelyn and Aaron, the Freemans.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in.
Yay, I'm so excited for this conversation. Let's start by having you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves and your family.
Oh, our family.
Yeah.
I love it because actually it was really different for both of us. So different. Go ahead.
Well, I think you might mean the family now, right? So
Either way, you can tell me about where you came from because I want to hear your origin story. So if that goes into your origin story, let's hear it.
Mm-hmm. Well, right now it's Jocelyn and I. We're living in North Carolina. We just moved from Arizona. And for all the listeners, you're going to be up to speed in our life as we think we're going to take the first half of this year and live in a different city
each month
for a month.
Mm-hmm.
And just explore, be adventurous. And it's Jocelyn and I, and we actually rescued a dog at the very start of quarantine. Her name is Ellie. So that's what makes up our current family as we travel around and explore different cities.
Yeah. So our upbringings, to give you a little bit more of our origin story, even how we created this business, like what inspired this, when we got together, we realized how much we had completely different upbringing. So my parents went from being madly in love, people envied their relationship, to a very intense divorce court, cops called, lots of yelling. And I was so fascinated by that. And of course, hurt as a kid. And it planted a seed of like, how can love turn into hate in a way? And him, though, he grew up in a very loving Christian, no arguments. He never saw his parents have a disagreement. In fact, more so, and you've shared this many times, your dad would shut down when emotion would, start to come up. So he never really
just
saw.
To be more clear, what I saw, and this is interesting for all the entrepreneurs out there and those that are parents currently, there's not like a good upbringing and a bad upbringing, really, because you take away whatever you take away for yourself. Now, as Jocelyn said, you could paint this picture of, I did have a good upbringing. And when my parents got into the slightest disagreement, I just saw my dad just stop talking and walk away. And later he would tell me, that was the very best he could do. Because he said, you wouldn't want to hear what would come out of my mouth, right? So then I modeled that. And so it doesn't matter about the upbringing necessarily. It's just what you make that mean. So I did that. But I found quickly in our marriage that by me not saying anything at all really had Jocelyn feel like she was shut out. She was isolated. It didn't further the conversation. It had us feel more disconnected than connected. And so I really had to go beyond my own default programming there and just start to communicate, right? As we talk a lot about personality types. So one could be more assertive, one could be more reserved. I'm a reserved type. I don't need to change that in myself. I just need to start to know that. And that's a part of what we do as relationship coaches, is help each other identify those types.
Yeah, so we could share a lot more, and I know we will in the conversation, but when we got together, we also realized that our culture functions in all this excitement about the wedding and getting married, and then there's counseling. And we thought, well, what about something in between for couples, right? Do you only work on your relationship when you're in crisis, or do you only focus on your relationship when you're planning a wedding? And we thought, no, just as you would go to a workshop to be a better entrepreneur, obviously you're listening to this podcast, bringing that same intention into learning what we call relationship skills. So that's where we birthed this business and our philosophy, and we'll pause there to see what that brings up for you.
Oh, I love that so much. We're very aligned in a lot of areas. And I thought it was interesting what Aaron was talking about, because I grew up, my parents divorced also. And so I had my mom and my stepmom, and they were two very, very different the way they dealt with their emotions, right? And so when I got married, I kind of tried both. I tried my mom's way and I tried my stepmom's way, and neither of them worked. And so I had to figure out what is the way that's going to be effective in my relationship, right? And so that was an interesting thing to kind of work through. And in the beginning of our marriage, I was like, well, this way doesn't work and this way doesn't work.
Exactly.
Well, can I ask you a question on that actually?
Yeah, absolutely.
Was that a conscious choice for you where you said, oh, I saw my mom and stepmom do it this way? And then did you consciously like try different strategies out, or was that more just subconscious?
No, I mean, it was totally subconscious until I really dug deep into like marriage and conflict resolution and stuff. But I just remember like kind of doing it my stepmom's way, which is a lot of emotion. Like everybody knows how you're feeling immediately right when you're feeling it. And my husband would shut down. He was like, I don't do a lot of emotion, right? And then I would try holding it all in. Like my mom, I never saw my mom get upset about anything. And then I would explode into, right? And so neither of those worked. So I just had to like, you know, it took being married and experiencing each other and, you know, figuring out where he comes from and those types of things. And then we landed on like, okay, this works for us, right? This is our way. So I do a lot of teaching on, you know, like learning about each other and like figuring out your own way. Like even if you were raised in a perfect household and your parents modeled perfectly, right? It's not your parents' marriage. You still have to make your own way. So yeah. So then to Jocelyn's point, I think that's amazing because I have 4 children. And once my 4th child went to school full time, I went back to school to be a marriage and family counselor because I was like, I want to help marriages. And I got a year into that program and I thought, I don't want to help couples when they get to the very end of their rope. Like I want to give them the skills that they need so they don't get there, right? And so I love that we're both, you know, very passionate about helping couples get the skills to, you know, really develop their relationship in a way that they don't ever get to that point.
I love that. So true.
Awesome. Well, so we talked a little bit about your origin story. So let's talk about your superpower, because I love this. You guys have been doing this for a while and you've helped hundreds and thousands of couples have breakthroughs in their marriages. And I'm so excited about this new book, The Argument Hangover. So I thought we would talk about communication and conflict resolution, because that's what I think you guys do really, really well. Do you want to tell us about the book and why we all need to get our hands on a copy of it?
Oh, thanks for asking. Well, it's funny. I'll briefly share where the term the argument hangover came from, because it's something we coined, and it came after talking to a lot of couples, and they would try to describe like, yeah, it's been a few days. We had a fight a few days ago and we're distant from each other and we're disconnected and I'm waiting for them to initiate and we're not really making eye contact. And I said, oh, it sounds like you're in an argument hangover. And it kind of came out of my mouth one day and the couple's like, that's exactly what it feels like. And so I started to use it more in talking to couples, and every couple was like, yes, that's it. And so we liked giving it a term because number one, it makes it feel like it's not just them. It's like, oh, this is something other couples experience. And also in a way, it can kind of bring some humor to it. But also our whole philosophy is, see, because we're shown this fantasy idea of relationships and movies and The Bachelor and all these things, we want all the love and the romance and the good moments. But what do we see a lot in media? Relationships ending when challenges come up. And so then people avoid conflict because they associate conflict equals bad. This whole book is designed to have people see that conflict doesn't have to be seen as something bad. There's actually incredible benefits that can happen when you learn healthy conflict. And instead, the goal is to shorten the argument hangover, right?
And keep it from escalating to those levels that end up doing more damage than what the thing even started about in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that so much. I love conflict. I teach conflict creates passion. So conflict is good, but you're right. We need people like you to teach us how to get from the conflict to the passion, right? So I love that. Let's dive in. So I think one of the biggest communication issues we have collectively as a society is this idea of, I said this and you heard that. Maybe that's part of that kind of relationship or that argument hangover. How can we maybe lower this occurrence in our interactions where I feel like I said this, but you heard that?
It's a great question. And I think it's a place that we want to fundamentally shift the way you initially even see that. Because when you're a business owner or you're an entrepreneur, logic is very beneficial for accounting, for marketing. Mathematics is great for logic. Well, look, marriage and relationships are not the place for logic, because look at it this way. As soon as you're arguing about the logic, no, that's not what I said. That's not the order I said it in. That's not what I always do. Don't tell me I always, you're in, what else are you doing? Logic creates what? Defined sides, essentially. So as soon as logic comes in, now there's two sides. When there's two sides, all you're doing is fighting to try to get them to see it your way, or to maybe succumb to your decision making. So the whole idea of logic just sets you up on the wrong path. So it really is about the emotional game. And I know maybe some men listening to this are like, oh boy, here we go, the emotional game. But it is about that. Relationships are about understanding, and they're about listening. They're about getting to the place where you understand and know more about your partner. It takes more questions. It takes more listening. So you have to at least first see, am I stuck in the logic mode? Because if I am, I'm already stuck. I'm already down a path where we're going to get into a conflict and we're going to be in an argument hangover. So the very first thing is you have to notice, oh, I'm in the emotional world, or I need to get myself more in the emotional world than this logic world.
And I want to jump in because it seems like, okay, yes, be a better listener. That's what I need to do. And people will kind of take that out of like social media, but okay, I'm going to work on being a better listener. And that sounds nice in theory, but people don't know what it actually takes to be a great listener, because listening is not a passive activity. Listening is actually an active activity, which most people don't think, because you think it happens automatically. Oh, my ears are hearing, and so I'm listening.
Or they think hearing equals listening.
Right. So we actually, in our book, you'll have some great visuals when you read it, because we love visuals. I think it really helps the brain understand things. But there's actually 3 types of listening. And to kind of keep it brief here, you can either not understand them at all, which means you're basically denying their reality, which is where you start to, argue for who's right, who's wrong. Then there's just hearing, which is where you're acknowledging the words they're saying, but in a way you're refusing to empathize. Like a quick example of that would be, let's say you're annoyed because your partner keeps saying like, can you please help with the dishes? And you might go, okay, fine, I'll help with the dishes in a few minutes. So you're hearing the literal words they're saying. But truly listening is listening to understand the feeling they're trying to communicate, the need they're trying to communicate, what's beneath the words. So going back to that dishes example, you could, if you were truly listening, go, oh, wow, maybe they're really tired right now. Maybe they're not feeling like I've shown up as a team member. They need more support. Hey, hun, okay, I totally hear you. Like, you want some help with the dishes. I want to help. I want to support. I'll be there in 5 minutes. And so it's like you're acknowledging the emotional. So I could rap on this for a while, but I think it's important that people understand that becoming a great listener is an active activity and it takes practice.
Yeah, I love that so much. And it leads me to my next question, because I saw a social media post that you did recently, and it's put in simple terms what your partner is saying versus what they're needing. And I think this is another hugely common communication misunderstanding, but also if you're only listening to the words, which is what I said this and you heard that, right? It can be really easy. And I think I encounter this a lot with the people that I work with, because they'll get really frustrated and feel like their spouse is not supporting them. And I'm kind of fighting this uphill battle where I'm like, it's not necessarily about they're upset about your business. It's really about their needs. So I want to kind of dig into that with you guys.
Yeah.
Well, you're exactly right. So where you started this was about, you start nitpicking or arguing about the details of the logic. No, I didn't say it that way. You work on your business all the time. No, I don't. You're already in the trap there, right? So here is what to actually say in those moments. And it really is a discovery. Oh, I hear you're upset about the amount that I work. It sounds like maybe you need some more support. Is that right? Or it sounds like what you're feeling is just overall frustrated and maybe overwhelmed. Is that right? So literally, again, the emotional game, see if you can get an idea of what you might think they're feeling, and then say that and ask him if that's right. It does two things. It gets that partner to actually reflect on what am I really upset about?
Mm-hmm.
Am I upset about the dishes? Am I upset about you being in the office longer? So you're automatically helping their mind to go not directly at you or the activity, but to self-reflect. Why am I actually upset? Is that right? Am I overwhelmed? Do I feel a lack of support? So automatically just notice how that shifts happens. And what'd you do? You really brought them into a discovery. So now you're on the same side. That's the whole goal. Logic, separate, emotion, and asking questions, same side. Now you're at least getting to the place of more understanding.
And as an entrepreneur, because we could share so much of our journey, because we were not entrepreneurs forever. We were both in different industries. We went through the whole quitting our job thing, even building the business to the point of being able to quit our jobs, and of course, scaling our business. But one that we hear commonly in the entrepreneurship space, where they maybe feel like their partner is not as supportive, not as on board energetically, their partner might say to them something like, really, you're investing in another coach? Or like, really, you're like joining another mastermind, or you're putting more into Facebook ads? Like, do you need, so they're kind of making these statements about, you're really doing this. And then the entrepreneur person could be like, they don't support me, they don't believe in me, all those things. And maybe there is some underlying conversation to have around what support looks like. But if you, again, practice the truly listening skill, let's say your partner does bring up something about the coach. Well, perhaps what they're trying to communicate is they need to like know more of your strategy, or they need to know more of kind of what your big picture plan is, or kind of how you balance your money. And so if you can listen for like, what is the need my partner's trying to communicate here, you will ask different questions. You won't take things as personally, and it will be a completely different conversation that isn't about defending yourself, but is instead discovering what your partner is truly needing to hear.
Yeah, so good. So good. I often, my friend described this so beautifully, but being the non-entrepreneurial spouse many times is like being dragged through the mud blindfolded when you don't understand what the entrepreneurial spouse is doing. So I think you described that very well. Like when they're saying this, but really what it means is they need to be brought in a little bit more so that they don't feel like they're being dragged through the mud blindfolded.
Well said.
Yeah, I love that so much. So I've heard you say a lot that you have to learn to fight smarter. And I know you have the 3 stages of conflict. I was hoping you'd give us a few ways you suggest we can actually fight smarter.
Do you want to even introduce why fight smarter?
What?
All right, I'll share
Go
something
ahead.
quick, and then you can go into the 3 stages. So the reason we say fight smarter, because again, is the goal is not to avoid conflict. That's where innovation happens. That's even where intimacy can be discovered, or a new level of bonding. So fighting smarter is about not causing as much damage during the time of disagreement, because the damage caused during the disagreement is what prolongs the argument hangover. And so it's doing less damage, and it's instead getting to a deeper level of understanding in the conflict. And so that's why we say fight smarter. And then we in the book go into the 3 stages of conflict. Do you want to talk about those?
Might seem obvious when we say it, but the 3 stages are before, during, and after, right? Really simple way to think of it. And when you break that down, right, we can put in simple strategies, skills, and tools for each. So just one that comes to mind for the before would be having agreements. And often we don't think about that. There are certain unspoken agreements, like when you're a part of a business or you have business partners or employees, there's a certain understanding of how you would talk to one another, right? Like in a business setting. And a lot of that might come from like positional leadership, and you're not going to raise your tone of voice with a boss or something, right? But in your marriage, somehow without agreements, it just, anything goes all of a sudden. It's like a free for all. It's like if you were in a boxing match, which even a boxing match, though might sound brutal, it has guidelines so that people don't get too hurt. But in a marriage, it's like you come into the boxing ring with a bat. It's like, where'd you get that from? So there really is a need for agreements to be put in place. So for some examples, Jocelyn and I have agreements of not swearing. And this was interesting. We brought this up on another podcast. And the one girl said, as a part of her personality, she doesn't swear. And so when she gets angry, she does, right? So it's outside of her personality. So we're not saying if you like to swear and that's like something that you and your partner agree upon, then that's fine. We're not saying it's a bad thing. But for us, just looking at what triggers us in arguments, what triggers it to escalate, we make agreements around those things. So another one would be that we don't leave the room when conflict starts to arise, or if there's a lot of tension happening and it's not productive, we don't just turn our back and leave the room. Mm-hmm. So we look at what triggers that emotion to escalate during conflicts, and then we make agreements to not do that. So that, here's another key. If you try to tell your partner, don't raise your voice at me, don't swear at me in the conflict, then what do they say back?
Don't tell me what to do.
Don't tell me what to do. Don't try to control me. But if you do it ahead of time, then you're just reminding your partner of what you both have already agreed to. So in the moment, it really feels like it's just a reminder, not something they're trying to control you with. So having agreements is super powerful.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Any other tips for fighting smarter?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So that was a before strategy. During it's actually extremely powerful that the moment you feel emotion is getting escalated and you can see, okay, this is going to either go down a destructive path or a constructive path, is to become more self-aware of when you are triggered and actually to call it out as a trigger. It can seem so simple, but if you catch yourself in the moment because you're building self-awareness and you realize your partner just said something that triggered you and you go, hey, I realize I'm triggered right now and I don't want to say or do the things I normally would do when I'm triggered because I'm committed. We fight smarter. Let's take a timeout. But a timeout is completely different than just walking out. And some people will try to retreat from the conflict by fine. And they just go into another room, or fine, I'm just going to grab my phone, or you know what, I need to make dinner for the kids. And you just kind of suppress yourself and shut down. And that's really retreating, is instead just set an intentional timeout. Hey, I realize I'm triggered right now. I think we should take a 30-minute timeout because I want to go and reflect on why that triggered me. And that'd be a whole other conversation about, we give some great reflection points for people. And so basically, as simple as it sounds, say out loud, I am triggered. Let's take a pause here.
I love that. I love that. So we got a before and a during. I assume there's an after.
Oh yeah. Oh, we have several we could give you. I mean, that's why we have a whole book on it, because we could give you several. So the after that I would say is aim to reconnect faster. Because a lot of times the ego in us, that part of us that likes to be right and is even willing to sacrifice love and connection because we're so willing to be, we want to be right, will keep us distant for days. I mean, we've talked to couples that have been in an argument hangover, meaning disconnected, for months, sometimes even years, if they've really built up a lot of momentum that way. And so don't let yourselves lose too much time in the argument hangover. And it took me a lot of practice, but we're now to the point where we won't let it go more than like maybe an hour being disconnected. Whereas my old pattern would have been like days of like the silent treatment, you know, one word answers, huffing and puffing around the house. So aim to reconnect faster. And we have a whole formula in the book called the 5 R's to repair after a conflict so that you can reconnect faster.
I was going to ask you about that if you wanted to go over that, but I'm curious just now what you would say about the whole don't go to bed angry thing.
Yeah, I think that it's, rather than it being about the going to sleep, because I think people fixate on the like going to sleep part, it's more so that if you, like, let's say you did have a disagreement at night, okay, because it just happened to be nighttime. A lot of times couples are after work, a disagreement gets sparked over dinner, you know, or afterwards, you know, when you're cleaning up. And so if it happens to be nighttime, it's more so that you're intentionally telling each other you're taking a pause, but you are going to reconnect. What we find is that when it's more of, you know, I think it's the Gottmans that talk about stonewalling, when it's about, I'm shutting down and you'll be lucky if I talk to you tomorrow. But if you intentionally at night say, hey, things got a little escalated today. I think that it's best if we both cool off. Let's get a good night's sleep. I'm committed we reconnect tomorrow. I want to talk. Let's be better tomorrow. That's different. So I think it's, again, not about like you should have to solve it right before bed. It's more so about what you say to each other. Let each other know you're going to come back to it. You're going to repair.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much, because I feel like I lost so much sleep in the beginning of my marriage because I took that so literally, like, we can't go to sleep. And my husband was like, I'm going to sleep. And I'm like, no. But we have since learned and grown, and I hate that advice when I hear it now. I'm like, please, if you're both tired, please go to sleep. Awesome. I love that. So great. That brings us to the 5 R's of repair after a conflict with a partner. I would love for you to just quickly go through those.
Yeah, sure thing. We probably wouldn't be able to go deep on each of them. We can tell you what the 5 are.
That's why we'll need to
as an
buy
ARE,
the book,
not
right? If
yeah,
we want
for
to
sure.
go deep, we buy the book.
Yes.
Yeah. So the first step is reflect. And I'll give you just the short version of it, right? Reflect is in the pause. So if you're in the conflict, it's sort of starting in a during, but then becomes an after. So you might say, hey, we're going to request this pause. So then what you do afterwards is you're going to reflect. But also, if you're in a current argument hangover with your partner, something that has been going on, and it's not like the present conversation, how you can overcome that is still starting to reflect, and reflect on really what was the root cause. If you had expectations, are they unmet? More so for the book. So while you're reflecting, also look at second step, responsibility. Your partner was in a conversation with you. Honestly, you have to look at this. There were 2 people in this conversation. So it's not looking for if you were responsible, as in for starting the conversation. As a real empowered couple, you look for where you do have responsibility. So it might be in your responsibility on where it escalated, responsibility around your energy, your tone, your attitude, maybe breaking an agreement. So honestly, like, look for your place where you can take responsibility, which leads to the third step of reconnecting. So that's where you physically now come back together. And the best place to start that conversation is, hey, I want to reconnect with you. I'm ready to hear you admit where you're taking responsibility. No, I know that's what, like, we all are like, I would feel great if my partner just came to me and admitted where they were wrong, and we could just move past it. It'd be so easy.
Right.
But it's really not. Like, as a leader, just start for yourself. Hey, partner, coming back together, where I see I can take responsibility is, and share that. And then so often that brings you back to connection, but there's lots of things like mirror neurons. You could talk about the psychology principle of reciprocity. Well, after you do that, your partner's often going to share, and they feel understood. Well, thank you for sharing that. I see where I can take responsibility too is blank, right? So they almost always share that back with you.
So that's the reconnect. Then there's remind, which is where you'll remind each other of what you're committed to. It can be in a way easy to somewhat like doubt maybe our partner and like what they are really committed to in our relationship after disagreement, especially if something hurtful was said, or I don't know, just I think unconsciously we can doubt it and maybe be concerned. And so you actually want to remind each other, hey, I'm committed that we have a loving, connected partnership. I'm really committed that we get better in conflict in the future. I'm going to work on this, this, and this. So that reminding each other is really healing. And then lastly is to reconcile. And that's to reconcile the conflict as an opportunity, meaning you as a couple take some time to not just see the conflict as something that shouldn't have happened. I wish this didn't come up, but instead, what was the gold in it? What new lesson did you get from it? And so if you can sit down and be like, you know what? Here's why we're going to be better after this. That will really kind of wrap the conflict with a bow, and you'll remember it differently. Instead of remembering it as, oh my gosh, that horrible day that we wish never happened, you'll be like, wow, do you remember that day we really learned something new about each other? Completely different. So those are the 5 R's at a very quick, high level. We go a lot more into it in the argument hangover.
Yeah, I love it so much. So I'm going to direct everyone to the book if you want to hear more about those 5 R's. So because this is about learning to juggle the demands of marriage, family life, and business, and the two of you obviously work very close together all the time, what are a few of the conflicts that arise for you guys most frequently, and what strategies do you use to resolve them quickly?
Oh gosh, and it's changed over time, but I'd say go
Yeah, a
ahead.
number of things. Having agreements was definitely a big one. If you're in business with each other or not, especially during like the quarantine life, right? Certain agreements about when your day's completed and
But
things like
an
that.
area of
But
disagreement.
also, I would say there's, as a business owner and entrepreneur, splitting up your geniuses, right? Like, don't work on the same thing. So we would have conflict where if we were putting together a speech and we were like both sitting down,
Mm-hmm.
both making the slides and coming up with the content at the same time, it's like I'd be like, no, change that font, that font's not right. Where she's like, no, I'm just trying to put all my thoughts together for the content. I'm like, no, space that differently. No, know your geniuses. And we do this great. Jocelyn comes up with the overall template, and then I come in, fill in the content, and make the slides. And then when I'm done, I show her the slides. Then we go over it for like final tweaking. So that's just one example of specifically for us where we got conflict before.
I would say also one would be in terms of like speed of communication and speed of decisions. And so I fall into an assertive personality type. This is something we don't keep meaning to plug the book, but we literally pack so much in there. So we go into the 4 communication personality types, and it's a framework we created where we even have like a self-assessment so you can see where you fall. So I fall into being more assertive, and he falls into being more reserved in terms of how we communicate, especially in times of emotion. And so we used to, without the awareness and the tools that we now have, I would want to rush his decisions and rush conversations. So it was on my timing. And he, more so when I would rush him, would kind of more like shut down or not be ready. And then I would feel isolated because I was like, well, I'm doing it on my own then, and I'm having to make the decision. And so what we really learned was to not change each other's communication personality type, but learn it, leverage it, understand it. So one quick example of that is I give him a heads up if there's a certain topic I want to talk about. Hey, I think we should talk about this certain strategy around our book, but I know it's really helpful when you have time to think about it ahead of time. How does tomorrow at noon sound? And because the reserve type usually takes more time to contemplate, more time to think about it, and that has them feel less kind of on the spot and pressured in that moment, it's completely different now. He gets a heads up, and the conversations are so much better.
Yeah, I love that. I love the word you use, leveraging our differences, because I think that's so important in any team, but especially when you're talking about a marriage, right? Leveraging your strengths and your weaknesses and things like that. So I love it. I love it. If you had the undivided attention of all the married couples in all the world for just a few minutes, what is the most important thing you could teach them about communication and conflict resolution?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one.
And really, I just think it comes back to where we started, which is really great. And it's just that the logic isn't going to work here. And so it's not really a game of trying to change your partner, not to have them be a match to your communication personality style, the speed at which you want to communicate. I mean, if you think about it, even if we put our faces together like this, in the physical world that we occupy, you cannot even see things exactly the same way. You can't see a tree at the same angle. So at the most fundamental level, you can't see things the same way.
Mm.
Let alone now when you get to circumstances and emotions, filters, stories, meanings in your head, that's literally an impossibility. You're heading down a path that's impossible to ever get to have your partner see it your way or
Mm.
be exactly like you. So that to me is the biggest thing. So the answer to that question then is seek for understanding.
Mine's slightly different if that's okay. So if we had all the attention, we would have, I love that one. And mine would be, simply put, their reality or their truth, even if it's different, doesn't invalidate yours.
Mhm.
meaning you can have two different perspectives, two different realities, two different ways of remembering things. And I think so many people think the goal of communication is get to a place where there's one that's agreed upon.
Convince.
Yeah. Who's going to overpower the other one? And that's actually not the goal of communication. The goal of communication is, to your point, first understanding each other, then see if there's a solution that's even needed. But that was transformative for me, to really see that even if his reality, his truth is different, it doesn't mean mine is more or less. They both are true.
Yeah, I love that. I think you like a good little mantra for that would be like 2 is better than 1, right? So
There
like
you go.
stop trying to like diminish what's happening here. We've got 2 perfectly valid experiences. I love that. You guys, this has been so fantastic. I love all the value that's been dropped here, and I'm so excited to get a copy of the book when it comes out. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
To learn more ways to deepen your intimacy and strengthen your relationship, make sure you watch this video next